Today, the master plan is possibly in motion. Pete Alonso is heading back into the lab to make sure he reverses the trends of his hitting prowess at the plate. Will Salmon from The Athletic goes into more detail. Plus, a little bit of a news note of Kodai Senga, and he had his first appearance in spring training. We're going to talk about those both on this edition of Mets Digest. What's going on, everybody? My name is Flobo Boyce. Thank you so much for rocking with me on that Mets Digest channel. There is almost 4,000 of us who tune in to make sure Mets Digest is a place to get your Mets news and notes. And I thank you so much for doing that. But if you could do me a favor, if you could rock with what me and Mike D'Angelo are doing right now, and make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. I do read comments, positive and negative, because I'm a glutton for punishment on the internet. That's right, I'm a big boy. I can take it. So before we get to our top story today about Pete Alonso, I give shout out to Kodai Senga, talking about redemption years, redemption arcs. Kodai had essentially a lost season in 2024, and now he was on his redemption path to make sure he is part of the plans of the pitching staff in 2025, especially with the injuries to Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea. I mean, granted, of different lengths. There is a bit of an expectation of Kodai to anchor that rotation because the Mets have made it clear they're not going for an ace pitcher outside of the organization at this point. At spring training this week, about 24 hours ago as I record this, did pretty well in his first outing. 2 hits, no runs scored, and understanding that he's a little bit more comfortable with his pitch selection and the stuff. So shout out to Kodai Senga and making sure he's part of the plan. So top story today, it's all about Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso was the most written about Met or free agent that became a Met over the past couple weeks. You know the story time and time again. Here was somebody that was in conversations to be captain. Here was somebody who thought was going to be a Met for life, was approaching free agency, had an idea to bet on himself, and did not do well. Season and a half of declining numbers, and it really kind of screwed himself over, quote unquote, with a short-term deal with New York. But that said, he's back in the fold. And the question now becomes, can he really be an adamant part of his lineup? More importantly, can he protect Juan Soto, who's pretty much a lock to bat second in 2025? But to do that, knowing the expectations Pete has, he has to go back to the lab to make sure he righted some of the wrongs as the season rolls on. The 2025 Mets have a series of expectations. The 2024 Mets did not. Remember, back in 23, it was supposed to be a rebuilding year. Then the first half of the season, or I would say the first third of the season, last season was pretty much a lost cause. But 2 glizzy iggies and a rally pimp later, OMG took over the city. Now the Mets have this plan of being competitive. I'm not sure how true it is, but remember, that was Steve Cohen saying championship in 3 to 5 years. This is year 5. And so if Pete wants to be a part of that, perhaps even long-term, he has to go back to the lab. Will Salmon at The Athletic talked about this and how Pete went and worked with the hitting staff to make sure he corrected some of the things that was really plaguing him last year. From a technical standpoint, Will Salmon writes, Alonso learned the importance of his hips as a power source. New York Mets co-hitting coach Eric Chavez said. Essentially, he grasps Alonso. Now he has his hips set in the right position at the beginning of the swing. In simpler language, Chavez says, Alonso has, quote, actually learned how to hit. Snap. Alonso figured out where he does well and why he does it. Alonso studied video to pinpoint the issue. Chavez called Alonso's work in the offseason a tremendous job. And that's pretty cool, too, because, I mean, Pete could have been a total diva and say, hey, look, man, I have my things going. I don't need your help. But here's someone looking to be coach. As always, every time we talk about Pete, got to give you the little bit of the stat line there just to make sure that we have some common knowledge of some of what things Pete have been doing over the past season. So definitely a step down by his own standards, but very important for the Mets lineup, very important for the Mets lineup composition, especially as we're trying to suss out what the back half of the lineup is going to be. There is a lot of different kinds of pressure, whether or not it's the classic New York pressure or the pressure for the Mets to do well, or the Pete Alonso pressure of still trying to be a serviceable first baseman despite his shortcomings, and I do mean that defensively. This is a chance really to see Pete go out here and show out. And speaking of showing out, just to give you a bit of a in-depth insight. Shout out to Baseball Savant with the stat line here. I wanted to give you this. For those of you who are all about the stats, this is pretty much a feast, a buffet for you. But if you're more of a casual fan, the things you want to look at is that, yes, there is some defensive lapses in Pete Alonso. He's always profiled that way. When he was a young kid mashing 40 and 50 homers, we didn't care as much. But you think about some of the games that we lost by a run or two, you really want to be able to, if not shore up defensively, be able to produce offensively to offset the runs conceded. But I look at that launch angle sweet spot, which is pretty much in the poor percentile, and what that means for Pete to be able to have quality hits as opposed to that feast or famine, mash or strikeout. And anyone who's watched the game last season knows that Pete has gone fishing, swinging and missing at those low balls all the time. Obviously, you don't want to strike out as much, but when you do make contact, you want to make sure it's a quality hit. But yes, the pressure really is on. And so the article, which I do recommend you read in its totality, over there at The Athletic, really went into what Chavez and company are doing and how Pete Alonso implemented what he learned. And so they had asked him, like, how do you really describe it from your perspective, the changes you're making? Is it going to be monumental? Is it going to be incremental? Like, how do you really, what's your perspective on it? I thought this is pretty apropos for Pete himself to say this. He says, quote, "The best way I can describe it is it is." The best, Alonso said, "Think of it as a drag race car and how things go awry when they're not on the track. So everything needs to be tight, locked in for everything to work together in the body. If I can't maintain a good swing every single day, the only thing I have to do is worry about the timing." Truer words have not been spoken. Got to give a little bit of prop to the Mets staff. And it's not just from Pete, but from anyone else we've seen over the past week, right? We had some stories about AJ Minter. We had some stories about other injury-prone players like Peterson and how they came back. There is a trust in the staff of the New York Mets we have not seen in years. I can even say maybe 15, 20 years. That's like decades at this point, right? That is something on the internal level that doesn't get talked about enough. I'm not sure what's inside the pitching lab. I'm not sure what's inside the thing, but we heard about Francisco Alvarez somehow also working on his hitting mechanics as well. You're hearing about Pete trying to find ways to improve. The Mets may have hit the right balance between stats, guts, personality, and chemistry to really build long-term success. And I know for a lot of us fans, you don't call it success until you have a chip. I get that. And I also agree. I like to be a champion one more time before I become old and gray. But these are things that make your organization sustainable, right? Having a healthy farm, making sure everyone has ways to improve after being signed and not necessarily just saying, hey, you're a Met now, go figure it out. And I think a lot of stars that we have signed were in that predicament. This is why if you are of a certain age, like I am, I'm a 90s kid, it was like, oh, the Mets really just sign people to not be good anymore, right? That's where good careers go to die. This may change the tide. But that's me reading in between the lines. What say you? Pete Alonso, he's locked in, man. He is ready. He is ready to really show out. Maybe it's for the team, maybe it's for the city, or maybe it's to secure a better contract, a long-term contract down the line. I would like to know what you think. Do me a favor. Let me know in the comments below. I'm out of here. I'm going to catch you next time. And as always, it's LJM to the bigger end.